Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Monday, the start of a new week. Those of you who are wondering, not only where I am, but why I'm still there, depending on how new you are to the channel, I am vacationing with my little dog, Frida, up in Vermont, at the home of Mark Richardson, a fellow booktuber from Richardson Reads. And we're welcome here. It's a very nice feeling. It's a very, very nice feeling. They might rib me a lot, but they also bend over backwards to make us feel wonderful. Except the cat. There's one cat. There are two cats here, and one of the cats is completely indifferent in the style of cats. The other cat really doesn't like Frida. She's not all that fond of that other cat. I wish that I could be more partisan, but the cat that really doesn't like Frida is really cute. Anyway, our original plan, sort of sketchy, because the old house here is the soul of hospitality. It's like Rivendell, the last only home on earth. So it's all the plans are kind of sketchy. The only thing that gives them structure is that, unlike me, everybody else here has stuff to do, and I don't know how to drive. I can't get back to Boston on my own. So the sketchy plan was that we would go back on the next day that someone who could drive the car had the day off and was willing to go. And that was Saturday, when Boston got hit with 2 feet of snow and had 70-mile-an-hour winds and wide-scale power outages. So not only was it not an inviting day to go back to Boston, but it was also not an inviting day to drive. It wasn't an inviting day to be on the roads. It's fine here, but it would get progressively worse. So we skipped that day, and there wasn't another opening. There isn't another opening for several days, so the Bean and I are here for the duration. You won't hear me complaining, but that's why I'm filming in Vermont still. That's why I'm not back at Hyde Cottage. But we're once again doing my library tour. I'm doing a library tour in 2022, and I took precautions. I knew that I wouldn't have my own library shelves to prowl through when I was up here, and I'm kind of hoping that the owner of these library shelves actually prowls through them himself. The biggest library on BookTube is not giving us a library tour yet, but so I loaded up scanned images of books that I have had in the past that were at one point part of my library. So like a lost limb, we can experience them together. So we'll go through a few of those today and for the rest of the week until when or if it's ever possible to return me and my little bean to Boston. It's cold and bright, beautiful up here, and I'm not sure. I mean, at the moment, when we're talking about unplowed driveways and snowbanks and slush everywhere, I'm not sure that I feel like going back to Boston. But the first one we'll start with is an old quasi-textbook. I encountered it in classes. I never used it in a class, but I also encountered it just in general interest in bookstores. So maybe it had a healthy print run that I just don't know about. The author is Robert Brown, and the book is Classical Political Theories from Plato to Marx. And it's exactly what you would expect. It's just a clear, concise, quasi-academic rundown of everything, of all political theories running through 2,000 years. So if you're not interested in that subject, you're not going to like this book at all. It's not engagingly written. It's not interesting for the so-called layman. You're just going to want to see how your pet political theory comes out in the long run. It might have an added historical interest, I suppose, an added historical interest given the 21st century, but if I saw it again, I scanned it when I had a copy, when I found a copy at some used bookstore somewhere, but if I saw it again, I wouldn't grab it, even up here in Vermont, where it would be 25 cents and a chicken. Okay, all right, this was a mass market paperback. It was in terrible shape, even when I got it. I've never seen it in any form except a mass market paperback. I would get it again, definitely. This is by Edison Marshall, and it's called The Conqueror, and it is a novel of Alexander the Great. Despite that cover. That cover is not Alexander the Great. That cover, I think, is Newt Rockney. But this, Edison Marshall, I mean, he was a journalist. He was a jack of all trades. But when he turned his hand to big, bustling, historically informed novels, they were corkers as far as entertainment goes. He wrote a book called Yankee Pasha that wouldn't fly today because a couple of the scenes in it that are conducted by the no doubt about it hero of the book are simply rapes. The only way you could reprint it would be for nostalgia. And if anyone in that nostalgia printing house actually read the book, they absolutely wouldn't print it. And something along those same lines happens he wrote another book, a really good, entertaining big book called The Viking. What I would argue is, if Viking fiction comes in all shapes and sizes, I would argue that it's one of the better ones, one of the better Viking fiction novels. And this is about the Conqueror, which is Alexander the Great. And that is tough for me, because I don't think you can do any better than Mary Renault's novels on Alexander the Great, Fire from Heaven, The Persian Boy, and Funeral Games. I don't think you can do any better than that trilogy. And you won't see that trilogy in the Library of the Lost because, of course, I have those books. But I would still get this again if I saw it. I think, if I remember correctly, I found this at a thrift shop on Cape Cod. And it was sun-blotched, and the pages were the spine was completely sun-drenched, and it didn't last. It was one of those, if I remember correctly, it was one of those old cheap paperbacks that had the green edges to the page. It was the spine that killed it. It was the spine that did it in. So, but it's enjoyable. It's very much the author projecting himself, or his idea of the latest cinematic hero onto Alexander. People do that with Alexander. Mary Renault does it herself, but he lends himself to that because we know a lot less about Alexander the Great than we would like to know. Let's just put it that way. And right from the beginning, while he was still alive, while he was still 30, myth and legend were working their way into his life. Places that he had just left would be promulgating entire mytho-histories that the people listening to those mytho-histories knew they weren't true. They'd just lived through it 2 weeks before, and they enthusiastically participated. He was one of those kinds of figures. You go into a novel like this with a grain of salt. I would hope you would go into any historical fiction with a grain of salt. With a grain of salt. Okay, this next one is technically historical fiction. It wasn't when it was written, but it needs a bit more than a grain of salt. All right, this is the author Frank Slaughter. I think, like most of the authors in this particular library tour, he's completely forgotten. But he was enormously prolific. Enormously. And a lot of his books sold. A lot of his books sold well enough to justify him being prolific. This wasn't one of them. It's a trip. It's a real trip. As you're going to be able to tell from the 70s period cover, this is a book called Countdown. And as you can tell from the cover, it's a NASA novel. If you squint really hard, in the background, in a blur, you can see a rocket. The reason why the cover looks like this, the reason why the emphasis is being put on where it is because this is about the lives of the men and women who live at a rocket launch site. So there is space technology, at least as it was half a century ago, more, that is in this book, that's all through this book. There is that. And if you like that in your novels, like, for instance, Space by James Michener or something like that, if you like that in your novel, or The Far Call by Gordon Dixon, a very much underrated book about early stone knives and bearskins space exploration. If you like those elements, they are here. But as you might be able to guess from the cover, there are other elements as well. There are men being men. There are men cheating on other men. There are men's wives being men's wives. There are strong-willed women and whatnot. It's you have to go into Countdown wanting to read that sort of stuff because there's too much to ignore. Not that you would want to go into Countdown at all. Then we get to historical. I guess we're going to do a lot of historical fiction this time around. This is by Cynthia Morgan. It's Court of Shadows, and it's a novel about a young woman in Elizabethan era who dresses as a boy, trains as a page, trains in the way to address men, the way to walk, the way to use a sword, in order to gain entree into the upper levels of Elizabethan society. And I found it very good. I liked it a lot. No idea why I got rid of it. It was a trade paperback, which was a little unusual at the time. I don't think this ever came out as a mass market paperback. And I don't remember ever seeing it as a hardcover. It came out, I had it as a trade paperback. I recommended it as a trade paperback, as a pretty good historical novel about, Elizabethan England. Lots and lots of famous people fill out the historical cast, but you never really lose the urge to root for the heroine. which is pretty good. And now that I'm looking at this thing, I have no idea about Cynthia Morgan. I don't have any idea if Cynthia Morgan is still alive. Of course, the number one perilous question in these library tours. But also, I don't know if Cynthia Morgan ever wrote anything else. Do any of you know? Did she write another novel set in Elizabethan England? Did she keep writing historical fiction, even if she changed time periods? Given how much I enjoyed this book, I'd be willing to read something else of hers. But not only have I never seen anything else with her name on it, I've never seen this book again since I scanned it. I scanned this probably 15 years ago, and I've never seen it used after that. And I look at a lot of used books, so I don't think it's around much. Oh, okay. All right, this next one is also historical fiction. I guess that will be the theme for today, but this is an order of magnitude better. This is by, let's see here, did I scan the names right? Eleanor Cooney and Daniel Altieri, and it is The Court of the Lion. And it's a novel about a cast of about 12 characters in the Tang Dynasty. It's sort of loosely connected not only with sketchily known history of the time period, but also with some of the legends of the time period. And it involves an iron-willed empress and a virtuous prince and a virtuous princess and a whole bunch of evil characters. And it's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. And it has to be, because it's the one thing you can't tell from these scans is that it's 1,000 pages long. I don't understand why it has been completely forgotten. I guess maybe to an untrained eye or to an uninquiring eye, you would look back 20, 30 years and you would see a lot of 1,000-page historical novels. And you would think, well, probably they're all garbage. And you'd be 90% right. But the 10% that you're wrong about is a shame. It's a real shame that 10% is not perpetually in print. I'm thinking of The Far Pavilions by MMK, which we saw up here in Vermont. That, I don't think, is in print in a paperback at the moment. I'm thinking of, for instance, The Journeyer by Gary Jennings, his novel about Marco Polo. I don't think that's in print. Big, fat historical novel. And there are a couple of others that I could name. One of you, actually, in a Q&A, asked about the novel Sacagawea, another 1,000-page doorstop of a historical novel that's actually quite good, although not as good as this. This is tremendously involving. Lightning fast pace. This is one of those 1,000-page novels that don't feel it at all. Not at all. They feel very light on their feet. You'll be burning through the pages, and you'll want to keep going. I got this. It had a gatefold cover, so there was this cover, and then there was a little bit of artwork on the inside cover. And it was not made. 1,000-page books are not made for mass market paperbacks. You can find some that will hold up, but mostly the sheer weight of the work rips the cover off. And that happened. I bought this in a bookstore as a mass market paperback. Started to read it with no expectations whatsoever. Ended up loving it. But that copy fell apart. I had to buy another copy just to keep on my shelf. And I think 2 years later, I wanted to read it again and pulled that copy off my shelf, and it also fell apart. So what I'd really like is a big trade paperback with deckled edges and French flaps of this book. Keep the cover art if you can find out who did it and get them to agree to it. Keep the cover art, or give it something evocative and new. But this thing deserves a life. It deserves to be known to people. It's really, really good. I wonder if it's the best work of fiction in this particular episode of the library tour. I'll have to see. Okay, the next one is by Stefan Di Stefano. I scanned my review copy. It feels a little scandalous to think that I was getting review copies before we were talking, but I was. I've been getting review copies for decades before I started showing them to you and talking about them with you. This is, I don't know when this came out, before we were talking to each other. This is Coyote at the Kitchen Door, Living with Wildlife in Suburbia. So just imagine the cover only without that uncorrected proof block there. This is not just about coyotes. You could fill a whole book. Authors have done it. About coyotes living in human spaces. There are plenty of them around here. And there are plenty of them around where I live. I have met and face smooshed with a coyote who lives less than half a mile from my front door and has probably walked right past my house at 3 a.m. Probably. Coyotes are not like wolves. Wolves are apex predators. They need an enormous amount of roaming territory. They are set in their ways, as apex predators tend to be, which is why they tend to go extinct. And they don't, at least most wolves don't integrate well into the human world for a number of reasons. One of which is that they are not inconspicuous. A coyote is going to look like your neighborhood dog, maybe a little bit rangier. But if you see a coyote roaming around in the garbage of a neighbor 3 houses down, you're going to think it's a stray dog. You're not going to think that it's anything else. You're not going to be close enough to see whether or not it's wearing a collar. So it's not going to raise the alarm quite as much as if you were to see a timber wolf nosing around in that garbage, where you would take one look at it, no matter how far away you were, and you would say, okay, that's not a domesticated dog. That's something I should be really afraid of. That's something that will kill my domesticated dogs. And coyotes will do that too. They are opportunistic. They are omnivorous, opportunistic predators, and they have infiltrated into, I can almost guarantee you, wherever you are listening to me right now, you have a coyote denning within a mile of where you live. I can almost guarantee that. They have filtered into every nook of every kind of city. They have adapted very well. But this book isn't just about them. This book is about all kinds of things, all kinds of wildlife, either integrating well or poorly with humans. I think wolves are mentioned in here, but so are moose. Bears, of course. Bears, as their habitats shrink, as their habitats change, they've been more and more frequent, getting bolder and bolder at dumpsters and dump sites and whatnot, and also wandering around and even looking for home garbage. That's a problem in a lot of places now that never had that problem 50 years ago. And on and on. There are also lots of wild birds that are represented here too, and it's very well done. This author writes about it with a lot of spirit, so that you're turning the pages, but also with a lot of empathy. This is not a book about pest control. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. They were here millennia before we were. It's not pest control. We're the pests. We need to do a lot more imaginative and a lot more empathetic ourselves about how we coexist with these creatures. A lot more. Because they have every right to be here as we do. But you already know what I think. They're people. They're not less people. They're people. They're different people. But anyway, it's a very good book. If you're interested in the subject of urban wildlife, and that is an ongoing subject, I think there are degrees that you can get in urban wildlife management. And if you're interested in that subject, this is a really good one that may have slipped below your radar. Okay, this next one is we go to fiction. This is a mass market paperback. I've never seen this in a hardcover. I don't think it came out in hardcover. I've never seen it in a trade paperback. It has never been reprinted as far as I know, and it is slam bang fantastic. If you like police procedural fiction, police action fiction, if you like those things, this is about as good as that subgenre gets. This is by Mitchell Smith, and it's called Daydreams. And again, I found this copy that I scanned in a thrift shop in Cape Cod and got rid of it. I remember in this case who I sent it to, and it was with a pang that I sent it, because I knew how hard it was to find. I'd been in bookstores all over the place. Of course, now there's the internet, right? So now there's Amazon Marketplace and there's eBay. So probably you could find a copy of this. God knows what kind of shape it would be in, but you could probably do that. But I cannot recommend this book strongly enough. I really can't. It's not for the faint of heart. It's the main plot line involves a woman detective who is investigating a crime that quickly it branches out to include other crimes. But I don't think, no offense to her, but I don't think that's going to be the part of this book that you remember the most. She has a colleague, a male colleague on the police force, who is a tank. He's enormous and old school and is not at all above. He's completely moral. He's completely upright, but he's a tank. He's almost not human. He's so big and so powerful and so straightforward. And you might think I'm going to say he's the one who dominates the book. He's the thing you remember, but it's not him alone. One of the criminals in the book, there are a whole bunch of them, but one of the criminals is his exact counterpart, also a tank, a gigantic man wearing circular gold-rimmed glasses. And slowly, over the course of, this is a long book, it's about 800 pages long if I remember correctly, over the course of this book, slowly you are drawn by the narrative to more and more want those two men to fight, to meet each other at last and deal with each other, one after another. Much like those of you who know the show Deadwood, and you all should, if you mention Deadwood to any fan of the show, all you have to do is say the words "the fight." You don't have to specify. There are lots of fights in Deadwood, but there's only one fight in Deadwood. And it's the exact same thing. When you have a narrative like this or like Deadwood or anything like that, narratives tend to, in any narrative like this, there tends to be a kind of centripetal urge for the two tanks to fight each other. Somehow, even if it isn't important, somehow you want it to happen. But there are scenes in here that are utterly amazing. I won't spoil whether or not they ever actually do fight, but I want to prepare you because this is not a gentle book at all. And you know that right from the beginning, right from the beginning. Literally the first scene where criminals have wire-tied a woman to a lawn chair, put that lawn chair in her shower, turned the shower on scalding hot, and left her there. And the book opens with her own thoughts on day 2. And it takes you about a minute to realize what you're reading, and then you're absolutely hooked. Or you're absolutely revolted and turned off in one way or another. But if you ever see this book, the 70s cover, it looks exactly like a million other kinds of books. You might be tempted to pass it up. Don't pass it up. If you're in the mood for police procedural fiction that makes Ed McBain look like he was talking about YA, if you're looking for really brutal but really readable, really well done stuff like this, gritty police fiction, I don't think you can do any better than this. So, but it's gone, well and truly gone. No one, I don't think, has ever even thought about bringing this back into print. And again, I have no idea if this author has ever written anything else. No idea if other books might be even better. For all I know, I'm reading his King John. Maybe he has a King Lear out there, but I don't know about. But I know one thing for sure. If I saw this again, if I see this up here in Vermont, I'm going to grab it. If Mark doesn't get it first. Okay, and then we'll finish up. We'll finish up for today with a book. Some of you of a certain age will remember this book. It sold like the dickens. It sold more than all the rest of these books put together. But it's gone. I think it's out of print. It's by Jim Bishop, and it's called The Day Kennedy Was Shot. And believe it or not, it wasn't his biggest seller. This sold like the dickens because of it came out right in a time when people wanted to know all about that day. But he also wrote a book called The Day Lincoln Was Shot that sold like crazy, just like crazy. And it's a very similar type of gimmick where he takes you through the whole of that day. He gives you background, and along the way, as he's following you minute by minute, hour by hour through that day, he gives you more background. So it's not just one day. But he goes into absolutely microscopic detail about what happens on every inch of the day in question. And believe it or not, you might think, well, okay, he's going to be a lot more accurate with Kennedy than he is with Lincoln because Lincoln is so much further away in time. But Lincoln is frozen in time. And what happened on that day in Dallas is not frozen in time, so to speak. So there are going to be, if you are an avid reader of Kennediana, or if, like myself, you have read a large chunk of the literature that's been written about that day in Dallas, about the day Kennedy was shot. If you are that kind of reader, I don't know how many are listening to me now, but if you are that kind of reader, you're going to take issue with some of the things in here, with some of the parts of Jim Bishop's chronology. He's certainly not, has no nefarious ends. He's not part of a conspiracy to cover anything up, but it's a fantastic book. Even with areas that might be called into question, little details where so-and-so was, whether or not so-and-so moved when so-and-so looks to move on the Zapruder film or whatnot. Even if you quibble with some of those details, this is still a book to have. If you have a Kennedy bookshelf, because let's face it, there's no way to have just a Kennedy shelf. If you're interested in something, it can't be just a shelf. But if you have a bookcase, this probably belongs on it. And I have never seen this in hardcover. I've never seen this paperback again. I don't have a copy of this book. I would love to reread it. Absolutely love to. Actually, I don't even have a copy of, a usable copy of The Day Lincoln Was Shot. I have an unusable copy. I have a copy that I wouldn't damage for all the mud in Egypt. Because for a long, long time, me sainted ma did not read. When you asked her why, she said, "I'm saving my eyes." And late in her life, I said to her, "Well, Ma, what are you saving them for? The organ donation bank?" And she said, "That's your mother you're talking to, you know." She didn't read. But She was never without a book because she had a lifelong obsessive fear and suspicion of bees. She didn't like bees at all. I tried many, many times to tell her that bees don't want to hurt you. They're not coming after you. Most of them can't hurt you. They won't if they have any choice at all in the matter, but it didn't matter. She not only hated them, but she wanted to be ready for them, like we were ready for the Soviets back then. She wanted to be ready for bees. So in her pocketbook, she carried a bee book. A book. She tested a few of them. She was no amateur at this. She tested a few of them to get the one with just the right balance, just the right ergonomics as a bee book. It's got to be perfect. It can't be just any book. To swat at bees. And for probably 25, maybe 30 years, her bee book of choice was The Day Lincoln Was Shot. and naturally, as you would expect, I have that copy, and I wouldn't read it. I wouldn't endanger it in any way. I've never seen another copy of The Day Lincoln Was Shot. I'd like to reread that too. The Day Lincoln Was Shot has lots of fascinating details that Jim Bishop was one of the first to promulgate to a wider audience. All sorts of things that, in retrospect, look really weird. That looked like they foreshadowed what was going to happen at Ford's Theater. The Kennedy's Last Day wasn't really like that, but it has mysteries of its own. Definitely mysteries of its own. If you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and hit the president twice by chance, which could easily happen, that could easily be the way it happens. Unlucky, and wildly improbable things happen all the time. If you believe that, then you already know all that you need to know about what happened at Dealey Plaza. But if not, if you have any doubt in your mind, if you're wondering if maybe there was something else going on, then you're going to be interested in looking at the Zapruder film to see the reactions of everybody involved. You can see a lot of reactions. And there are parts of the Zapruder film where it kind of looks like some people are reacting very differently than others. This has led lots of conspiracy theorists to say that some people in the motorcade knew more about what was happening than other people. It could just be that people react radically different in a situation where no one, with the cheering of the crowd, no one can quite be sure what's a gunshot and what's not. I myself think that the varying reactions break down exactly along the lines of which people had been in combat, of which people knew the sound of a gun when they heard it, even through the yelling of a crowd. It's a sound you know from a million miles away. You can pick it out of 20 other sounds. Even when you're distracted, you never forget it. And Kennedy was one of those people. And there were a couple of other people in the motorcade who were those people. And I think they all react the same way. Kennedy knew instantly that gunshots were going off, that it wasn't car backfires or firecrackers or anything like that. He knew instantly what was happening. I don't think he thought until the very end that he was going to be hit. In other words, he made an order that the motorcade would not have the top up. It would not have the bubble top, which was partially bulletproof. He made an order to do it. He wanted people to see him, and he wanted people to see Jackie, his wife, because he was kind of running for re-election, right? So he wanted that. And my question, just in a morbid kind of way, is, did he live long enough in Dealey Plaza to regret that decision? I always wonder that. Did he live long enough to say, we should have put the protective covering up? Either way, this book brings really good in fleshing out personalities. It'll bring the whole day alive. I would imagine the vast majority of you, I would imagine that the vast majority of the people who are listening to him right now consider the assassination of John F. Kennedy to be ancient history. I'd be curious to know how many of you listening to this video right now remember where you were when this happened. 9/11 might be different, although a huge chunk of my readership, I'm sure, also considers 9/11 to be history and not lived reality. I, of course, don't remember either. 90s kid. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. That is the Library of the Lost for today. We will just keep barreling along with the Library of the Lost as long as the Bean and I are stranded up in Vermont. So I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.